Well, thank you, Karen and Ruby. It's always a pleasure to jump in and connect with different people to talk about the most exciting topic that there is for business owners, which would be probably not insurance. But that said, it's an important subject, and a lot of times there's a lot of misconceptions or just a lot of confusion about what the actual insurance does, what types of insurance are most relevant to an individual, and how do you even protect yourself. So that said, what we do to help prevent those sorts of confusions from happening for different business owners is we at Veracity Insurance Solutions have a product that's specifically designed for food entrepreneurs. So those entrepreneurs could be uh, somebody with a small farm or a large farm that's taking their produce and selling it at a local farmer's market. It could be for a food manufacturer. It could be for somebody who's just starting at home, maybe make the best cookies around, and somebody in your family mentioned, "Hey, you should really start uh, sharing this with those around you." So whatever that might be, all three of those scenarios have a wide range of potential liabilities, and they're not all created the same. So our goal is to kind of go through the different types of insurance. Many people are familiar with auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, maybe even life insurance. Where there's often a shortage of knowledge would be what's the best insurance for your business. So our goal is to talk about different types of insurance related to food businesses, and as well as to identify those gaps or misconceptions, and then see how could you even get coverage depending on what type of business you have. So big going through it, big picture, why insurance matters in general is you are held liable for certain actions that could occur. And so those actions, especially when it comes to anything with food, can be quite costly. So if you're serving your local cookies or the produce that you've made or whatever meals are being provided, uh, you could have somebody who gets sick from your product. So oftentimes we talk about product liability across different types of businesses. And then in the food industry, we talk about specifically food liability, but that's just because that is a product to look at. And so if somebody got sick and they were able to trace back to, hey, the food that came from the event at the university, that's where I got sick from, there could be a potential claim there. And the other aspect of this for food businesses is often those businesses conduct business across a variety of settings. So it could be at your local market, it could be at a big pop-up event, it could even be at a university. Maybe it's an event on the university or a small catered setting, whatever it might be. All of these present different aspects that could make a business liable for potential claims. So overall, there's not one size fits all policy. For example, if you're a solopreneur, you're not going to be looking at workers' comp, depending on your state regulations. But once you have employees, workers' compensation is often a requirement, as it is in the state of Utah, and is also something that can help prevent you from facing claims from injuries or damages to the employees. So not a one size fits all. You have different coverages, and especially as a business grows, those coverages and risks also need to grow. So, first off, perhaps one of the most basic insurance coverages out there that's included in all sorts of commercial business policies would be general liability insurance. And the easiest way to remember general liability insurance is it covers slips, trips, falls, the bodily harm that happens. And so, a perfect scenario of this would be you're at a local farmer's market, maybe a big event in Salt Lake, and somebody slips in your designated area, whether that be a booth or just a stand or maybe just on the little corner, and they get hurt. Uh, what's going to happen is if that person is going to file a claim, they're probably going to file a claim against that specific business and then whoever was in charge of the event, just anybody and everybody. And so sometimes a common misconception would be for the small food business, they might think, oh, well, I'm just attending here to sell my products. Nobody would sue me. They would sue the event host. But because it happened in your space, odds are you're getting sued just like the event host. So general liability insurance comes in for those slips, trips, falls, the bodily harm. It can also come in for property damage, where maybe you're renting a small space for the weekend to sell products and you damage that existing property. That often gets captured in the general liability policy. So this is a pretty basic coverage that's included on most policies that you'll find out there, and it's wide ranging. There are some limitations. Sometimes different insurance companies might limit it to just your place of business. So maybe if you conduct business at home, on the road, you're going to events, maybe specific sites, you might be a little bit limited there, but there are options that follow you as a business entity. So regardless of where you're conducting business. The next one would be product liability, which we kind of touched on before, where especially with food, it's very common to have your product liability insurance. And oftentimes, conducting business with different entities, it might be a requirement, such as if you were going to have the next big food item, it goes viral, you're manufacturing it like crazy, getting it distributed. Those big distributors are often going to require product liability insurance, and then they want to be named on the policy as well, which you call an additional insured, which simply extends coverages in the instances where uh, your product has caused harm to somebody but is distributed by that company. So product liability insurance, kind of like we mentioned, it could cover potentially allergic reactions. It can cover maybe it's not an allergic reaction; it's more of just food poisoning that happened the day after. And the tricky part with that is oftentimes the claims don't come up because people might have difficulty proving where it came from. But in the case that it did, they can actually be very severe reactions and can often have pretty expensive price tags with them. Now, there's another policy that is available once again throughout the insurance industry that is oftentimes viewed as product liability insurance, but it is quite different. And that policy would be recall insurance. So once again, if we're talking about manufacturers or distributors kind of getting your product across the country, maybe it's more regional. Let's say there is a claim that somebody had a bunch of food poisoning and it's found out, hey, the batch of ingredients we used or whatever we created was causing this. And to prevent extra claims and to prevent harm from to the customers, we need to recall those sold units. And so this is very different from product liability. So product liability kicks in for the actual claim of damage from the product. Recall insurance would be used to cover the costs to recall all those products, bring it back, and notify people that, hey, we need to have this returned because of whatever issue. And so oftentimes they get lumped together, very different coverages. Similarly, this recall insurance is one of those coverages that might not be most relevant for small businesses. If you don't have that wide range, there's not a lot of distributing going on, it's highly regionalized and local, it would probably be very easy to simply handle it in-house rather than paying for that recall insurance throughout the year. Once again, that would depend on the size of the company, the scope of the product, and then just kind of that territory. Are we sticking locally in your city? Are we going statewide? Are we going nationwide? And then along with that, we had mentioned earlier workers' compensation insurance. And so sometimes this also gets mistaken for other coverages. And it's a little more specific than many people interpret it to be. So workers' compensation insurance, as simple as we can say it, pays for medical bills, can pay for lost wages, for employee injuries. So it would not cover a customer. So if maybe you had a storefront, maybe it's going back to a farmer's market. If somebody got hurt, that was a customer, workers' compensation insurance would not step in and help them out. They're not your worker. Workers' compensation insurance would only cover those who are employed by you. Similarly, the general liability insurance, the product liability insurance, those coverages are for third parties. They're not covering your workers. So sometimes a business might think, hey, I'm covered with workers' compensation insurance. I'm good for anything and everything. Or I have general liability insurance. I'm good to go. Doesn't matter what comes up. I have $1 million policy. I should be good to go. Well, that's not where the coverage is designed to be. It's not a comprehensive aspect that covers anything and everything. It's very specific. So when acquiring insurance, regardless of which specific industry you're in, what type of product you have, the size of your company, it's going to really depend on what are the needs, what are your risks, what are you willing to pay for out of pocket? So let's say you're just starting off, you don't even know if your product is any good. You might need to get a few sales before you're going to think about even buying insurance. One thing to keep in mind is if there was a claim, how much could you afford to pay out? Depends. And then the other part is make sure you're well aware of what coverages you do have to prevent any sort of mishaps where you thought you were covered. Here comes a claim. Turns out you only had the liability insurance that was good for general liability and not the product liability, and it was a foodborne illness. So that would fall outside the scope of general liability insurance. So double check what you're looking at. Not all insurance coverages are the same. They're also not all the same price, and they can vary depending on business type, size of the business, your revenue, where you're located, and then where you're going to be conducting said business. Furthermore, just reiterating that workers' comp does not cover independent contractors, the food related claims, or any product related claims in general, and it does not cover property damage. Those are different types of coverages that you would want to review and obtain if relevant to you. And then another one that goes along with these other coverages would be insuring your own stuff. So there's a few different types of coverages that cover your own property. And so oftentimes you'll hear of commercial property coverage. You'll also hear of inland marine coverage, and sometimes colloquially, people will say equipment coverage or inventory coverage. A lot of those have some overlap, but they're not all the same. And so one of those would be equipment coverage versus commercial property coverage. And so the commercial property sounds a little beefier, if you will say, where it's more comprehensive. It's looking at kind of your building, the permanent structure. So those are things like the what could be installed inside the building versus more mobile equipment, tools, inventory that can be moved around. That's often covered by inland marine. Uh, it can be a confusing name, but it's basically saying if it can move, it's going to be an inland marine sort of scenario. If it's commercial property, it's going to be more of what's fixed in place. And there's going to be situations where both of those are relevant to a business. There's going to be situations where neither one of those is relevant. Maybe it's just outside out of your house. You have not a lot of tools or equipment or inventory, so it's not a concern for you. Once again, it comes down to how much could you afford to pay if you lost it or had it stolen or if it was damaged. And so those are different factors to consider. Now, this next coverage probably not relevant to many, but it could be, or down the road it could be, would be liquor liability insurance. And once again, there's different coverages. They're not all the same. So if somebody were to uh, be selling food and they're selling some sort of alcoholic beverage, there would be a difference between the general liability, the product liability, and the liquor liability. So once again, general liability, we're looking at the slips, trips, falls. We're looking at the physical harm that comes from that. The product liability would be your product harming that third party. And then liquor liability, depending on the coverage, it can relate to those higher risk activities that a somebody committed some sort of damage or certain other activities because they consumed your products. And so oftentimes liquor liability comes into play with we'll use different types of bars where they're a fixed location and they're over serving people. Those people leave and then something happens. Oftentimes a claim comes in and they're going to go after who served all of the liquor to that individual. That's what comes in. Once again, might not be common in this space, but in case somebody were to go that route, you want to make sure you have your bases covered. So some common insurance mistakes that we often see. So oftentimes, especially when somebody's first starting out, they're assuming, hey, my homeowner's insurance, it's enough. I I have my coverage. I've had it for years with my local insurance guy. I'm going to start my business and I'm off to the races. That's an incorrect assumption, where oftentimes homeowners coverage, it could be renters insurance, it could be your condo, it could be for your townhome, it could be for your house, whatever the scenario is. Those are very specific to insuring your property or having coverage for those liability claims if somebody got hurt on your property, but it doesn't extend to businesses. Now, sometimes you do have the option to add an endorsement to extend that coverage to your business related activities. There's definitely going to be a price increase on that. Some places won't do that. They might even consider dropping you if you bring it up because they don't want the extra risk at your home. And similarly, it wouldn't cover your product liability. So if you're, let's say, distributing meals, you're selling them out and about, but you're making them at home. So somebody comes to pick up their meal, that falls outside of your typical homeowner's insurance. Now, definitely, it's worth asking your insurance agent if there are sorts of coverages that can be added, bundled, or used with your homeowner's coverage. But that insurance on its own, it's not enough, and you'd be leaving yourself at risk of having no coverage at all if an incident occurred. Similar mistakes would be having one or the other when it comes to product liability or general liability. Uh, in the food space, most businesses are pretty good at having product liability. They recognize I'm serving food or beverages. I don't want anybody to come after me because we had a bad day and for whatever reason they got sick. So that seems to make sense to many. What might not make sense is having general liability insurance for the slips, trips, falls, or the incorrect assumption that the product liability covers that as well. And then oftentimes, what we see, especially with smaller businesses, is they wait until somebody asks for proof of insurance, oftentimes. And by that proof of insurance, I'm not saying that a claim might happen and then somebody asks for proof of insurance. It's more common that they'll run into a business relationship. So whether that's a storefront, whether it's working with a distributor or local events or what have you, and they'll find out whoever they're trying to conduct business with, they require certain insurance coverages, oftentimes general liability and the product liability, but there could be other scenarios where they want to make sure you're protected and that they're protected. So once again, double check if you have insurance, what are you actually covered for? Maybe we named off one of the coverages that you had and you thought it covered everything, or maybe you have zero coverage. It's always worth double checking. What can you afford to pay to protect yourself now versus what can you afford to pay if you have no protection later? So the other part of this is kind of circling back to depending on the size of your company and the stage that you're in. So starting out, general liability and product liability will take care of you for most instances. And just to review, that slips, trips, falls, the bodily harm or harm that comes from the product. And in this case, that would be the food or beverages that are distributed. As you grow, maybe there's more equipment. You have a lot of expensive equipment. Maybe it's highly valuable, so you're afraid of it being stolen. Maybe it's irreplaceable in your mind based off of your current budget. And so you want to have coverage for your equipment, your inventory, what that might be. Similar to that is as you grow, you're probably going to hire at least another person. And so that's where workers' comp comes into play. And depending on the state, there are pretty strict laws when it comes to workers' compensation coverage. And in many states, it is required. So as you're scaling, that's one thing to keep in mind. Where are you conducting business? Maybe you live in Utah, but you're going to a different state primarily. What are the requirements there? And then scaling. Are you distributing? Are you becoming a large scale food manufacturer? And once again, are you going to dip into the liquor side? And so don't go too crazy and overbuy at the beginning. There's a lot of coverages that probably wouldn't be relevant to you. For example, if you're just selling locally and everything's paid for in person, there would be no need at that point to acquire a cyber liability, which is if somebody were hacked and there's a breach of your customer's data or stolen pieces of information. That's where cyber comes in. If you're not doing anything online, then the odds of that happening are pretty low. So just keep in mind that you want to make sure you're protected, but specifically protected for the stage that you're in. So you might start off with only a coverage or two, but by a later date when you've grown, you've probably expanded your coverage. So where does Flip fit in? We are specifically designed for those foodpreneurs where they're just starting out and they're growing. So we're not working with those large scale restaurants that you would see on different corner streets. We're working with those who are like many of those attending this webinar are starting out, are in the early stages, or just haven't even started. They want to start out. And so whether that's a food truck, a food stand, a produce seller, it could be a cottage food operator who works out of their home and sells all the best cookies in Utah. It could be somebody who is looking to become a caterer, a private chef. The fits are wide ranging, and it just depends on where that person starts. And then the other aspect of that is nobody wants to find out they need to have insurance and it takes them a long time to get it. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. So we're an online program where it follows you where you conduct your business. So, final takeaways, food businesses face specific risks that may differ than other businesses. So, maybe you have a friend, a colleague, a mentor who's in a different space and they recommend certain coverages, but they might not realize the differences that are facing the food businesses. So, make sure you protect yourself, your income, and what you do. And then just remember what can you afford to pay out if something were to happen. And so your right coverage depends on where you're at today, and just depends on where you want to be as well. So we can go ahead and jump into the Q and A's if there are any left in there.
We do have one question about insurance specific to agritourism and visitors to a person's farm. What type of insurance would you recommend they have in that case to protect themselves?
That's a great question. So one of the things when it comes to specifically covering your farm, that's going to be very different, and I'm sure this individual might have ran into that than homeowners insurance or liability insurance. And so specifically, there's farm insurance, and then in this instance, you have your agritourism, which is becoming more popular. And I'll be honest, many insurance companies don't like to touch that side of things because they're used to your traditional farm. Nobody's coming to it. It's just whatever leaves the farm. So with that, I would review with a company that can cover farm insurance, and that's where I would start with that scenario. It also kind of depends on the risk factors. So, but recently I was actually talking with a school where they are a small outdoor school and they have farm animals there. And so you're dealing with kids, the farm animals, and you know what? They teach kayaking lessons on the pond. And so once there's water involved, then a lot of insurance companies get a little scared. So that's where I would start is start with your farm insurance and see where it stops. Insurance agents would be very open in talking about that. And then with any insurance policy, it's always good to check the specific exclusions as well.
Okay, we have one other question. Do you insure non-Utah based businesses? Or where can people outside of Utah go to find their insurance coverage and get that help?
Yeah, great question. So we are based in Utah. We're here in Pleasant Grove. We insure people across the country. So I would actually say, despite being in Utah, most of our customers are in California, New York, Florida. So depending where you are, we'll definitely be able to connect.